Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. There's something about that name. Some of you caught those hymns in that music that was shared by Leon Johnson. Really appreciative of his willingness to let us use that as an introduction. Definitely want to check out his music, his album, and very enjoyable stuff. As we think about Jesus this weekend, of course, it's all about him. And as we think about Good Friday, it seems strange to call it a holiday. It's a holy day. But in terms of celebration, we struggle with that because yeah, looking backward, we see that this was the moment when our sins were paid for, when our lives that were filthy and dirty and full of rebellion were cleansed by a sacrifice of Jesus. And so we can look back with great fondness and say, on a hill far away, there stood an old rugged cross, and I love that rugged cross. But there's a gravity to this moment that maybe you've been feeling. Hopefully you've been preparing your heart for this reflection. This is a horrible event. This is beauty and perfection being dragged through the mud. This is Jesus being attacked, being betrayed, being murdered, but doing so willingly because of our redemption. His goal was to ransom many. As I've been reflecting on Isaiah 53, some of you are aware of that, a passage about the suffering servant, the one who would bear our sin. It's interesting that in Isaiah 52 we see an announcement, Yahweh is coming back to become king. And in Isaiah 53 we see the suffering servant, which we'll read about. Then Isaiah 54, we have a new covenant is going to be made with the people. And then in Isaiah 55, a new creation, a new created order. And you can't have the new created order of Isaiah 55 without the covenant of Isaiah 54, without the suffering of the representative of God, the servant of the Lord in Isaiah 53, which is hinging on the king returning to Jerusalem. Let me read a little bit from the First Testament. It's a newer translation by a great Hebrew scholar, John Goldengay. There's a beauty to this translation that is interesting. It tries to keep it as Hebrew sounding as possible. And so the language I find shakes me up from some of the quotations I've heard before and helps me ponder it a little bit differently. How lovely on the mountains, this is Isaiah 52:7, how lovely on the mountains are the feet of one who brings good news. One who lets people hear all is well. One who brings good news lets people hear of deliverance. Who says to Zion, your God has begun to reign. A voice. Lookouts are lifting voice. Together they resound, because with both eyes they see Yahweh going back to Zion. Break out, resound together, wastes of Jerusalem, because Yahweh is comforting his people. He's restoring Jerusalem. Yahweh is baring his sacred arm before the nation's eyes. All the ends of the earth will see our God's deliverance. So prepare yourself. God's coming back. Next scene. Who would have believed what we had heard? And upon whom did Yahweh's arm appear? He grew before him like a sucker or a root out of dry ground. This root we've been expecting, a root of David, the one that would come out of the line of the kings of Jerusalem. But he had no look and no majesty, so we should look at him. No appearance, so we should want him. He was despised and the most frail of human beings, a man of great suffering and acquainted with weakness, as when people hide their face from someone. He was despised, and we didn't count him. How many times have you just overlooked Jesus. Said, there's nothing about that name that's anything special. How have we done that? We've overlooked him. We haven't counted him. We haven't considered him in a way that's respectful and reverent. Yet it was our weakness that he carried, our great suffering that he bore. But we ourselves had counted him touched, struck down by God and afflicted. But he was the one who was wounded through our rebellions, crushed through our wayward acts. Chastisement to bring us well-being was on him, and by means of his being hurt, there was healing for us. All of us, like sheep, had wandered. Each had turned his face to his own way. There's a way that seems right to men, but in the end it leads to destruction. We like sheep turned away and said, yeah, I'll head this direction. Yahweh, he let fall on him the waywardness of all of us. He was put down, but he was one who let himself be afflicted. And he wouldn't open his mouth. Like a sheep that's led to slaughter, or like a ewe that's silent before its shearers, he wouldn't open his mouth. By the restraint of authority he was taken. Who could complain at his generation? Because he was cut off from the land of the living, because of my people's rebellion, the touch came to him. He was given his tomb with the faithless, his burial mound with a rich person. Because he'd done no violence and no deceit with his mouth. While Yahweh desired the crushing of the one he weakened, if with his whole person he lays down a reparation offering. He'll see offspring, he'll prolong his life, and Yahweh's desire will succeed in his hand. Out of his personal trouble, when he sees, he will be sated. By his acknowledgement, my servant will show many that he is indeed in the right, when he bears their wayward acts. Therefore, I'll give him a share with the many. He'll share out the numerous as spoil, in return for the fact that he exposed his person to death, when he let himself be numbered with the rebels, when he was the one who carried the wrongdoing of many people and was appealing for the rebels. Oh, Jesus. Appealing for the rebels. I'm there. Are you there? Appealing for the rebels. I want to read a bit from Mark now, Mark chapter 15. Jesus had just gone through a sham trial where they thought it convenient, if we just get rid of Jesus, we can save the nation. It would be great if we just get rid of this one guy and then all can be saved. The political turmoil was too much. There was a fall guy, a scapegoat. As soon as it was morning, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council, and they bound Jesus and led him away and delivered him over to Pilate, who was the governor. And Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered him, "You have said so." And the chief priests accused him of many things, and Pilate again asked him, "Have you no answer to make? See how many charges they bring against you?" But Jesus made no further answer, so that Pilate was amazed. Now at the feast he used to release for them one prisoner, for whom they asked. And among the rebels in prison who had committed murder in the insurrection, there was a man called Barabbas, literally son of the Father. You catch any irony there? And the crowd came up and began to ask Pilate to do as he usually did for them. And he answered them, saying, "Do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews?" For he perceived that it was out of envy that the chief priests had delivered him up. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have him release for them Barabbas instead. And Pilate again said to them, "Then what shall I do with this man you call the king of the Jews?" And they cried out, "Crucify him." And Pilate said to them, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Crucify him." So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released for them Barabbas. And having scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. So we've got Jesus silent before the slaughter, willingly laying down his life, willingly suffering the affliction for us to create a new people. Out of a suffering servant, a new covenant would come. And the soldiers led him away inside the palace, that is the governor's headquarters, and they called together the whole battalion, and they clothed him in a purple cloak, and twisting together on a crown of thorns, they put it on him, and they began to salute him. Hail, King of the Jews! And they were striking his head with a reed and spitting on him and kneeling down in homage to him, mocking him. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of the purple cloak and put his own clothes on him, and they led him out to crucify him. And they compelled a passerby, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country. And this little side note, you know, Alexander and Rufus's dad, they must have been part of the church. I bet this moment settled in them. This Good Friday moment for them settled in deeply. That this truly was the servant who would give up his life to bear the waywardness and iniquity of all of us. To carry his cross. Simon carried the cross, and they brought him to the place called Golgotha, which means place of the skull. And they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he didn't take it. So just outside the city, there was a hill outcropping of stone that was shaped like a skull. And it's visible today. And the picture of outside the camp, outside the city, that's the place that the sacrifice goes. The scapegoat goes outside the city to bear the sins. So we have a lot of just metaphor and expectation flowing through this passage right now. They offered him wine mixed with myrrh to deaden the pain, but he didn't take it. And they crucified him and divided his garments among them, casting lots for them to decide what each should take. And it was the third hour, that would be 9 a.m., when they crucified him. And the inscription of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." How many times have we heard, the King is back in Jerusalem. The kingdom is coming. The King will arrive in Jerusalem. We saw that in Isaiah 52, and now here we have it in so many times just in this passage. The King, the King, the King of the Jews. And with him, they crucified two robbers, two rebels. They would be insurrectionists, most likely. And on his right and on his left. And those who passed by derided him, saying, "Aha, you who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself, come down from the cross." You know, Jesus claimed that his body was the temple, that he was the intersection of heaven and earth, that in him the fullness of God dwelt, that in him the presence and provision of God were located. You know, the temple is a space where they would do ceremony, where God would dwell with man, and of course at that time only one person one time a year would go into that temple space. But Jesus arrived saying, "I am the temple space. I am the tabernacle, the mobile tabernacle." That's going to be very important here in a second. You would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. He meant that about his body, that he would rise in the third day. Save yourself, come down from the cross. So also the chief priests with the scribes mocked him to one another, saying, "He saved others, he can't save himself. Let this Christ, this Messiah, the King of Israel, come down from the cross so that we may see and believe." Those who were crucified with him also reviled him. And when the 6th hour had come, that would be noon, and there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour, till 3. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why am I bearing the sin? Why am I bearing the waywardness? Why am I bearing the affliction? Why am I experiencing the pain that should be theirs? Well, it's because in the garden, where the first blood of the atonement was shed, as he wept and as his face poured out blood, that he said, "Not my will, but yours be done." And some of the bystanders hearing it said, "Behold, he's calling Elijah." And someone ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, putting it on a reed, and gave it to him to drink, saying, Wait, let's see whether Elijah will come down to take him. And Jesus uttered a loud cry and breathed his last. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And most of the time when I think about that, I think of, oh, now we have access to the Holy of Holies. Maybe we have the ability to go in. But it's just as true that when Jesus died, the curtain was torn because the presence would no longer stay inside. The presence would come out among us. The presence has left the temple. Just like in the pictures of Ezekiel, I'm going really Old Testament on you here, but in Ezekiel, the presence of God lifted up in that chariot, in that Godmobile, and left. I think that's the image here too. But there's something with it. Where is God's presence now? Jesus, when he died, before he died, he said, I'm going to send my spirit among you. And when he rose again, he said, wait for my spirit, because that's going to be the very intersection of heaven and earth again. This is going to be God's presence in his people as they go out. So it's not just go to the temple, not just go to the holy mount and look at what was there. It's now receive. What a calling we have to be those who walk in the presence, walk with the presence of God. The temple is us. Wow. When the centurion who stood facing him saw that in this way he breathed his last, he said, truly this man was the Son of God. And there were also women looking on from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, and Mary, the mother of James the younger, and of Joseph, and Salome. When he was in Galilee, they followed him and ministered to him. And they were also there were many other women who came up with him to Jerusalem. What a beautiful picture of disciples. And when evening had come, since it was the day of preparation, the day before the Sabbath, Joseph of Arimathea, a respected member of the council, who was also himself looking for the kingdom of God, took courage and went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Now Pilate was surprised to hear that he should have already died. But remember, Jesus is in control of giving up his own life. And summoning the centurion, he asked him whether he was already dead. And when he learned from the centurion that he was dead, he granted the corpse to Joseph. And Joseph bought a linen shroud, and taking him down, wrapped him in the linen shroud, and laid him in a tomb that had been cut out of the rock. And he rolled a stone against the entrance of the tomb. Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, saw where he was laid. So we have all this eyewitness testimony of Good Friday. We have all these pictures coming together of how the King is going to arrive to create a new covenant, to bring about this new creation. And maybe you, on this Good Friday, have never said, Jesus, your death counts for mine. My life is given to you. It's a simple transaction that takes everything that you have. To say, I follow Jesus, to say, Jesus, I want you to save me. Jesus, I need you. Jesus, my sin is on your shoulders. My sin puts you on the cross. The rebellion of humanity puts you in a situation where you have to come to take the punishment for humanity so that we can have a new covenant, a new partnership. Maybe it's time for you just to say, I give up, I give in, I give you myself. We would love to walk with you through that journey. But for those of you who are already followers of Christ, I just want you to ponder his beauty, his love for you. His understanding of suffering is so unique and so profound that you can trust that he sees you, he knows you. He knows the grief you're experiencing. He knows in this time of the novel coronavirus, the weight of isolation, the weight of grief that continues to pile on. Maybe some of you are like I am. I don't know why I'm sad. I don't really have one indicator. It's just, there's just all this stuff piling up. And just know, he knows your weakness. He knows your pain. He knows your suffering. He's been there. So on this Good Friday, spend a few minutes maybe going back through Isaiah 52 and 53, maybe 54, 55. Spend some time praying as a family, maybe just taking communion by yourself as those elements, just remembering his death for you. May God bless you. And Friday, Jesus is in the grave, but Sunday's coming.